Hello and welcome to this webinar on the pursuit of happiness. And so this topic is obviously a very big one, and we're going to cover a number of different areas in a very general sense, but there's a number of those that touch on some of the other webinars available. And so if there's a particular topic that you want to learn a little bit more about or explore a little bit further, just please feel free to take a look at those webinars. All right, so just to get us started, these are some of the objectives that we're going to be going over. And I love this quote: that happiness is a choice. You are the only person who can make you happy. You're as happy as you choose to be, from Rick Warren. So we're going to start off by taking a look at some of the misconceptions of happiness. And so these are some of the things that ultimately we think we know about happiness, but that aren't quite right. So in 2003, some research found that Americans were the most unhappy in the world, that antidepressants were being prescribed at 400 times the rate as 20 years ago, and that Americans as a whole were not getting happier, and that certain groups of Americans were actually getting unhappier. And so we have what is or can be known as the G.I. Joe fallacy. So G.I. Joe, if you recall this show many years ago, the tagline was "Knowing is half the battle." However, what we've recognized is that merely knowing is not enough to actually put things into practice and change behaviors. And so some of the pictures up here, you see the lines with the arrows at the end, and actually both lines are the exact same size. But depending on the shape of the arrow, the direction of the arrow at the end of the line, the bottom line looks to be longer. And so even though logically we may know that both lines are the exact same size and that this is an illusion, we can't help but to see them as being different in length, similar with the tables on the right side of the slide. Those tables are the exact same size, but based on their position in that square and to one another, they look very different. And so what are some of the things that you think will make you happy? And so what are the things that you think, if you had right now, would make you happy in the moment? And what are some of the things that you think will make you happy in the next year, or the next 5 years or 10 years? And I kind of want you to spend a little bit of time thinking about that, with the warning, however, that everything you thought was important for being happy probably isn't. And so here are some facts. A 2015 study suggests that an increase in money does not actually equal an increase in happiness or life satisfaction. Why? We always want more. And so if we get a little bit of a raise or a little bit of an increase in money, we're like, well, but maybe a little bit more will help me get to that next stage. And this is common in wealthier nations, so after the basic needs have been met. And so this is not necessarily true for individuals who are not getting their needs met, because ultimately a little bit more money would make them happier because they're going to have more of their needs met. David Myers shared what is called the American paradox. Compared to grandparents, today's young adults have grown up with much more affluence, slightly less happiness, and in fact, a much greater risk of depression and assorted social pathology. Why? What's happening, right? Danny Kahneman and Angus Deaton talked about whether or not there is actually a threshold for happiness. And so they looked at this as having a positive effect, maybe the not blue feeling, and stress-free rises with income up until about $75,000 a year. But then ultimately it levels off in terms of happiness. And so even though our emotional well-being isn't going up over $75,000 a year, we think our own evolution of our own life is going to go up. And so we have this mismatch between how we're actually going to feel and how we're evaluating our real life. And so this mismatch is causing an issue. So a lot of things that people will wish for is if only I had awesome stuff or true love or the perfect body. But there's a number of studies that actually say that this isn't true either. And so in the 1940s, happiness level was about a 7.5 out of 10, whereas in 2015 it was a 7.2 out of 10. But we actually have more material goods than we had in the 40s. So Nickerson looked at materialists had less life satisfaction versus non-materialist 2 decades later. And so materialists actually had more mental health disorders. And so when we look at it as if I had more awesome stuff, I would just truly be happy, it's actually showing us that the opposite is true, is the more material things that we have, the less happy we tend to be. Next is true love. And so Lucas et al. Noted that married people are happier in year 1 to 2. But after that, married and non-married individuals tend to level out over time. And what about the perfect body, the perfect health, the perfect physique? Jackson et al. Noticed that individuals with weight loss had increased levels of depression 4 years later over those whose weight was stable and even those who had gained weight. Von Saust et al. Noted that those who had plastic surgery reported increases in satisfaction with physical appearance, but had similar or increased levels of suicidal ideation, alcohol abuse, and conduct problems after their surgeries. And so it's not actually getting at what is making us unhappy and what can make us happy. So why don't these things make us why do these things not make us happy? Our intentional, effortful activities have a powerful effect on how happy we are. Over and above the effects are set points and circumstances in which we find ourselves. And so there are things we can do to make us happier, but most of the goals we think will make us happy don't really make us happy. So we're seeking out the wrong things. So why are our expectations so bad? The first reason is miswanting. The act of being mistaken about what and how much you will like something in the future. And so, this idea of, if I had this awesome thing, I'm going to be happy. When the future comes and you actually get that thing, you're not as happy as you imagined you would be. And so it almost sets us up to feel worse because we don't have that increase in happiness. And so one of the things that I share with this is when I did my dissertation defense, I had all of these expectations in my mind about how I was going to feel and what I was going to do and what those expressions of happiness were going to be, that sense of relief. And when it came, the way I described it was missing the fireworks that I expected. So I actually felt worse because I was like, I'm done and I'm supposed to be excited and celebrating and all of this stuff. And I didn't feel any of that. I felt disappointment in myself. And so some of the things that play into this are these annoying features that we have. And so one, our mind's strongest intuitions are often totally wrong. And so going back to knowing is half the battle, these tables, knowing that they are the same shape and size doesn't change the fact that we perceive them in this image as being very different. The second annoying feature is our minds don't think in terms of absolutes. Our minds judge relative to reference points. So we're constantly engaging in comparison. A salient but often irrelevant standard against which subsequent information is compared. And so if you look at these images, both of the dots in the center on the left are the same size, as you can see in the image on the right. However, when you put them in comparison with different size dots, they actually take on what appears to be different sizes when in fact they are the same size. And so we can look at a study of referencing on ourselves in regards to others. And so when you look at an individual who won a bronze medal, their reference point is, I could be not even on this stage at all. I could have earned no medal. And so I'm so excited to be up here having earned a medal at all. whereas the silver medalist is comparing themselves to the gold medalist. I could have been up there with the gold, but here I am with the silver. And so you can see how that level of comparison can really change and impact where we are, where that bronze medalist could potentially feel happier than the person who earned the silver, simply because of how we're referencing those awards. So do reference points also affect our happiness judgments in our daily lives? So what we used to make. So taking a look at salary. So how much salary do you need? If you're currently earning $3,000 or $30,000, you may say, well, if I just make it to 50,000, that'll solve everything. However, if you're already at $100,000, maybe you're looking at 250,000 as being that point of reference that you need to get to. And so your actual income is being compared to what you see as being your required income, instead of kind of looking at how your life is and how your income is actually impacting your day-to-day life. And so we also take a reference point not only to what we make and what we have made and what we could make and things like that, but also we compare it to other people. And so taking a look at the cartoon on the second slide, or the right side of the slide, if you can't read that, I'm going to read that for you. It says, okay, if you can see your way to giving me a, if you can't see yourself giving me a pay raise, then how about giving this other person a pay cut? Right. And so I don't care that I have to keep making this money, but in reference to me, I want other people to be making less. And so it's that social comparison, which is evaluating our own salary, status, possessions, abilities relative to other people. And so I know a lot of people will bash on social media and things like that. But when we look at these like Instagram lives that we're comparing ourselves to, of course, we're going to be unhappy. We don't have all of these things, this perceived happiness that other people have, and feel bad about ourselves. So to continue this, Harvard students were asked in this study, which salary would you prefer? Option one, you get 50,000, but everybody else around you is making half as much. Or you could get $100,000, so you could get double that. But you would also know that everyone around you is making 250,000. And actually 56% of those who were asked this question would choose to make more money than other people, even if it meant making less overall. So it's that constant social comparison that we're falling into. So then we're going to move to annoying feature number 3, which is our mind is built to get used to stuff. It's called perceptual adaptation. And so if you look at the cartoon on this page, it says just married with this couple beaming 2 years later, just ... married, right? We get used to it. It's no longer novel. And so you can go to the workshop on novelty, right, to kind of investigate this phenomenon a little bit further, which brings us to the idea of hedonic adaptation. It's the process of becoming accustomed to a positive or negative stimulus so that the emotional effects of that stimulus kind of diminish over time. We're no longer as unhappy or happy about those things as when they first happened. And so this quote is being shared from Daniel Gilbert. Wonderful things are especially wonderful the first time they happen, but their wonderfulness wanes with repetition. All right. Annoying feature number 4. And we're going to pause just for a second before we get to that. All right, sorry about that. Our annoying feature number 4 is that we don't realize that our minds are built to get used to stuff. So not only do they get used to things and no longer see them as novel, but we don't always realize that that's what's happening. And so this is impact bias, the tendency to overestimate the emotional impact of a future event, both in terms of intensity and duration. So again, my dissertation, I expected to be just like over the moon, overwhelmed with excitement and relief and just, again, those fireworks. And I expected it to last for a significant amount of time. And when I got there, I was like, oh, I was happy that I passed, and I just kind of feel okay now. This is strange. And so impact bias is actually worse for negative events. So we expect that the intensity and duration of negative emotions or negative experiences are going to impact us way more than what they are. And so that's what the left little image on this slide shows. The one on the right says, yes, I believe I'm going to enjoy this, showing an image of a cat in front of a humongous pile of hot dogs, which kind of reminds me of the hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July every year. You know, are you really going to enjoy that 10th hot dog as much as you enjoyed the first? Probably not, right? All right. So why are we so bad at predicting how we feel? And so there are two psychological biases that are likely happening. One is focalism, which is the tendency to think about one event and forget all other things that will happen. And so we're so focused on this one thing that we're forgetting that there's other things occurring that are going to impact our happiness and our well-being and all of that stuff. And the second is immune neglect, which is our unawareness of our psychological immune system. And so the unawareness of the tendency to adapt to and cope with negative events, right? And so we think it's going to be horrible and it's never going to end and it's just, oh, but we forget that we're quite resilient, right? We have the ability to adapt and get through those things. And so how do we overcome our biases? Well, one, we get over getting used to stuff. And so don't invest in stuff in the first place. Remember, we don't need it. We don't need all these material things to make us happy. And so again, Dan Gilbert shares, part of us believes that that new car is better because it lasts longer. But in fact, that's the worst thing about the new car. It will stay around to ultimately disappoint us. Instead, invest in experiences. Again, from Dan Gilbert, a new car sticks around to disappoint you, but a trip to Europe ends, right? It's over at some point, it evaporates. And it has a good sense to go away, and you were left with nothing but the wonderful memory of it. And so the images on the bottom talk a little bit about some studies that have been done. And so the excitement of an experience may have brought you, you know, a 2.64 level, and the pleasantness of it a 2.58. But those material items really only bring us a much lower level of excitement and pleasantness. The next study on the right, do you feel your money was or will be well spent on material purchases and experiential purchases? And the forecast is that those material purchases are going to bring us much more happiness than the experiential purchase. However, in the end, 2 weeks post-consumption and 4 weeks post-consumption shows that the experiential purchase actually brought us more, an increased feeling, I should say, of the money was well spent over the material purchase. So to continue on, we don't adapt to experiences. Experiences can make us happier than stuff. Experiences are better than stuff for other reasons. The anticipation actually makes us happy because we're so excited about this thing that's coming up. When you tell people about your experiences, it's so much more fun than to tell them about your stuff. You know, to talk about a fun trip or experience that you had actually brings that sense of excitement and happiness back versus talking about an item that you purchased. People view you more positively too when you talk about this awesome experience you had, maybe this fun night with friends versus, oh, hey, I bought this new gadget. And experiences are less susceptible for social comparison. So, you know, a new gadget, oh, I'm going to compare myself to this other person's phone or computer or whatever. But they may not be comparing experiences, right? Because all of our experiences are different. And so there's a study depicted on this slide that compares experiences to material in terms of happy thinking about it contributes to our happiness, and was it money well spent? And again, we can see that the experience had an increase over the material purchase. And so how do we thwart that hedonic adaptation? This is the next step in being able to find ourselves happier. And so we spend time engaging in savoring the experiences. And so we kind of step outside of it to review it and appreciate it for what it is. We're in that moment. We can talk to another person about how good we are feeling in that moment or how good we felt when we were there. We can look for other people to share it with. Hey, look at that sunset. Isn't it gorgeous? Think about gratitude and how grateful you might be for that moment or that experience or those people that you're sharing it with. And show physical expressions of that energy. Jump, laugh, smile, yell, whatever it is you need to do. And think about only the present moments, like, oh, wow, like just sharing in this moment, being here, seeing this thing, hearing this thing, being with these people. And so some key steps to this is don't focus on the future. Don't remind yourself it's going to be over soon. Don't think about the ways it could be better. And don't tell yourself you don't deserve this good thing, because there you are experiencing it. And so some studies shared on here is that people were asked to replay happy memories in their mind for 8 minutes a day for 3 days, and to think of the event as though you were rewinding a videotape and playing it back. And people actually had sustained increases in positive emotions 4 weeks later after they engaged in this exercise, because reminding yourself of those experiences can really be pleasant and helpful for us. We can also take a look at negative visualization. So think about like the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It breaks you out of the here and now adaptation. And so we're not in the moment, we're constantly going back. And so make this day your last. For specific situations in your life, what if they were going to end or you were just about to lose them? What would that be like? And how would you feel? And so how can you enjoy that moment or those moments and really savor them before they're gone? And so again, another study, couples wrote for 15 minutes about how they might have never met their partner. Controls in the study wrote about how they met. Those who wrote about how it might not have been actually rated higher in happiness. And that's because they recognized how grateful they were for what they had. So gratitude, the quality of being thankful and a tendency to show appreciation for what one has. And we're going to have a webinar on gratitude that you can take a look at as well to dig further into this. And so taking a look at these quotes, there are many things in our life, both large and small, that we might be grateful about. Think back over the past week and write on the lines below. Obviously, you don't have this paper with you, but write down things that you're grateful for in your life or things that you have to be thankful for. In the next week, write a letter of gratitude to someone who has helped you or has been especially kind to you, but has never properly been thanked, and then deliver this in person or to the person in question. And so these are some activities. Again, we go into this more when you take a look at the webinar on gratitude. So the second way that we can work on this is to reset your reference points. Again, we're going to engage in this comparison anyway. So what can we use as reference points that will be better for us? And so our reference points affect our happiness judgments all the time, even if we don't realize it. And so we can concretely re-experience, find ways to go back and re-experience our old reference points and remind ourselves, use our imagination. What are the things I'm taking for granted, and reappreciate them. So yeah, I got this raise a year ago and I don't feel like anything is different. Well, you know what? Like, think about what it was like before you got that raise, and maybe some of the struggles you were having then that you're not quite having now. You can concretely observe, find a reference point that is not as good as yours. So, I may be struggling in this way, but I also know that, a family member has struggled much more so. And so, this is my struggle and that's theirs, and they're very different in different ways. Try to avoid those social comparisons as much as possible. So social media, find healthier reference points. You can use the stop technique to catch yourself doing the comparison and shut your brain up and go right back to gratitude. You can interrupt your consumption. We want the good things in our life to continue, but if you can force yourself to have an interruption and come back to it, you get a reset for your reference point, and vice versa for negative things. You can also increase your variety, avoid hedonic adaptation by switching things up, right? Like, what is something little I can do different? Oh, I'm so tired of working out. It's just the same thing over and over, and I just don't feel like it's making a difference. Switch up your exercise routine and see how you can make it exciting and different for you again. And so again, there is a whole webinar on novelty that you can take a look at, but here's one challenge that you can do to look at your loved ones in a much more novel way, and avoid getting into the trap of the same old kind of stuff. All right, so what is stuff that actually does increase our happiness? We've talked about all the things that don't. And so better wanting. So wanting the right parts of what we already want and wanting better stuff that we don't want yet. And so kind of flipping it using the things that we already know. So the first is, wanting the right parts of what we already want. So maybe we want a better job or more money or things like that. But why is it that we want those things? We can go into our signature strengths and we can also increase flow. Those are likely the things that we're truly seeking by saying, I want more money, or I want a new job, or I want this, or I want that. And so what are the parts of it that are really important to us? And so when we look at signature strengths, they're character strengths that we already have. And once we're able to identify what they are, we can use them to help increase our happiness. And so Martin Seligman has a free inventory on his website where you can find some of your character strengths and then how can you use them. Because the more that we're using our signature strengths, the happier we're going to be. We're going to feel productive. We're going to feel like we're doing something. And so there are 24 character strengths. You can see on the little heart right there. And you can even create maybe something like that highlights the ones that are strongest for you. Signature strengths are those that are most essential to who we are. And so if we use one of our top strengths in a new and different way every day for 1 week, it's going to make a huge difference. And so you can kind of see in the charts that Seligman did research on this, and that using our signature strengths did increase ultimately our positive well-being. And so the second part that I talked about was increasing flow. This is a concept that has been discussed by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He has a number of books out there on flow, but flow is the mental state in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized, focused, full involvement and enjoyment. And so often we'll talk about this as the zone, like I'm getting in the zone. The rest of the world sort of disappears and I'm doing this thing. And so some of the images on the screen are like sporting events that sometimes can cause flow, musical performances, or even, doing some work on the computer, or writing, or engaging in some activity that just gets us in that place. And so some of the features of flow are that it's challenging but attainable. So it should be something that isn't just so simple for us that we don't even have to pay attention to it, but it shouldn't be so hard that it's completely unattainable. We want to make sure that we're engaged in strong focus concentration. The activity is intrinsically rewarding, maybe externally as well, but definitely intrinsically rewarding. It gives us feelings of serenity, a loss of self-consciousness. We're not even thinking about how we're being perceived. We're so focused. It can also lead to timelessness and losing track of passing time. We can sometimes have a lack of awareness of physical needs. You're so engaged in the activity that you're like, oh my gosh, it's been hours since I last ate or drank or went to the bathroom. And so it's a complete focus on the activity itself. So how do we achieve this? The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And so there's an image there. If the skill is very high and the challenge is very high, there's that kind of corner that we can engage in flow versus arousal, anxiety, worry, apathy, boredom, relaxation, and control that can happen when these the skill and the level are sort of off balance. So how does this play out? We're going to look at a study that was done where work, if it has a high challenge and a high skill situation, work with a sense of efficacy and self-confidence. Leisure would be low challenge, low skill situations, and leisure can lead to apathy and boredom at times. And so, what would you rather be doing? Leisure over work. But what do you prefer to keep doing? Leisure over work. So, why is there a disconnect? Why does a work situation with high challenge and high skills and a sense of efficacy and self confidence actually feel really good when we're actually seeking leisure that doesn't always make us feel good? And so there's a disconnect in our beliefs about what work and leisure look like. We think that, lounging on the couch, scrolling through social media is leisure. I'm not working, I'm not doing anything, but that actually doesn't make us feel very good. And so this kind of plays into the idea of flow. I need to be actively involved, engaged, and focused, right, in that zone in order to feel good about it. And so motivation definitely plays a part. There's that extrinsic motivation, which is where we're doing something just to earn an external reward or avoid punishments. And then there's the intrinsic motivation, which is engaging in it because we enjoy the activity itself. And so sometimes adding an external motivation to an activity that already has an intrinsic motivation kills the intrinsic motivation that was present. And so I enjoy baking. I love making cupcakes, and people are always saying, oh, you should do this. You should sell cupcakes and you should do this for a business. And I think, well, why? That's going to take all of the fun out of it, right? I have this intrinsic motivation to bake and make these beautiful little cupcakes. But if you put an external motivation to it, having to do the work in order to get money, to get paid, to do a business, it kills the intrinsic motivation I once had for it. And so that's why sometimes we think we want to engage in these leisure activities much more than work, is because work has those extrinsic factors that are kind of killing some of the intrinsic motivation we would otherwise have when we're in a job or doing a work activity that we really love and really enjoy. So we can use this growth mindset to help us. So introducing an external motivator can undermine that growth mindset, which is the belief that intelligence can be trained and that most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Whereas a fixed mindset is the belief that basic qualities like intelligence and talent are fixed traits. We're not going to grow. We're not going to do anything new or different or learn more. We believe that everything is fixed. And having that growth mindset can help us to get past those external motivators that sometimes zap the intrinsic motivation. And so kind of comparing these, the fixed mindset is focused on grades, performance, believe that good performance comes naturally. If I have to work, then I'm not smart. Effort is a bad sign that I'm not good at it. We might conceal and hide deficiencies and mistakes, whereas a growth mindset focuses on learning and not what the outcomes are. Good performance does take work, and that hard work is good. It's how we get better. Effort is a good sign that we're making progress and growing. We also make the most of deficiencies and capitalize on mistakes and use them as learning opportunities. So another thing that we can kind of take a look at is kindness. And so does merely thinking about kind acts increase happiness? Participants in this study kept track of acts of kindness they performed and reported the daily number of kind acts. And what they found is that there actually was an increase in happiness when people were keeping track of the kind acts that they were engaging in. So it's not solely engaging in them, but reminding themselves that they did these kind things increases our levels of happiness over the controls in the study. Another study looked at whether or not the acts of kindness increase happiness. And so the goal was to, over the next week or day, you're to perform 5 acts of kindness. And in one day, on different days, and versus no acts. And so the control actually saw a decrease in happiness. Single day engaging in it saw a large increase in happiness. And then doing it on different days actually showed a decrease as well. And so spending on others increases happiness across cultures and income levels is what they found in another study. But it's really important to pay attention to it sort of in the moment, right? In the day, these are the things that I'm doing. Another piece is social connection. And so people with close social ties are less vulnerable to premature death, more likely to survive fatal illnesses, and are less likely to fall prey to stressful events, right? It helps build that resiliency in us. In another study, we looked at, or they looked at, not me, subjects who sit near a Confederate, and they're asked to eat tasty chocolate either shared while the Confederate eats the chocolate or while the Confederate is looking at art. The Confederate in the study is the person who's working with the experimenter. And so what they found is that the people enjoyed the chocolate much more when it was a shared experience versus they were offered the chocolate and ate it alone, which is interesting, right? We enjoy things when we share them with others. The third is time affluence. So time affluence is feeling like you have the time to do the things that you want to do, which I think is in rare form in our society today. But we need to make sure that we're prioritizing time over money is associated with greater happiness. And so if we're able to do that and we're able to recognize that our time truly is worth a lot to us, our happiness, that is an important step in being happier. The fourth is mind control. And so our mind tends to wander. It shifts in the contents of thoughts away from an ongoing task or from events in the external environment into self-generated thoughts and feelings. We kind of get stuck in there. Our minds tend to wander 46.9% of the time, which is huge, right? It's almost half. Why do our minds wander? We have this default network. A network interacting in brain regions known to activate by default when a person is not actively involved in a task. So we talked about how flow, you're concentrating, you're focused, you're engaged. When we're not doing those things, we tend to go into the default mode. And so the default mode network is really fast. It can happen quick, especially if we're engaged in a rote activity. We're doing the same thing over and over again. Our mind is more likely to wander. And it also thinks outside of the here and now. So it starts to go to the past and the future and other people, which increases the comparisons and all of that stuff that we just talked about as zapping our happiness. And so mind wandering is actually a cognitive achievement, but does it make us feel good? And so looking at the study, 2,250 people were surveyed about their thoughts using experience sampling. So what are you doing? Are you thinking about what you're currently doing? And are you happy? People's mind wandering, again, was about 46.9% of their waking hours. Again, nearly half, right? People mind wander about 30% of the time in almost all activities. They found that this was different for sex, however, sexual activity. But mind wandering had a negative impact on the individual's happiness overall. And so more quotes from Dan Gilbert: the ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that ultimately comes at an emotional cost. And a wandering mind is not a happy mind. So how do we stop this? We can engage in mindfulness practices and meditation. And so mindfulness is a state of being. I'm present, my mind is here in the here and now. And meditation does require us to be mindful. And so meditation can be a practice of turning our attention away from distracting thoughts and towards a single point of reference. And so often in meditation, people will use a word, a mantra, a phrase, an idea, an image to stay focused. And so it can ultimately curb mind wandering because we're training our brain to be focused. So the fifth thing is healthy practices. We can exercise. This has been known to increase our happiness, and getting enough sleep can also make us happy. And so we a lot of times will talk about things like, oh, I just don't have the time to exercise. I can't find myself, being able to engage in it. I just don't get enough sleep. There's not enough time in the day. But we need to recognize that improving these things can have a huge benefit to us. And so on the screen, there are two lists. One is how to improve our sleep, and the next is how to improve our sleep environment to help us sleep better. And so some of them are avoiding exercise within 2 hours of bedtime, being consistent with an exercise program, keeping a sleep diary to assess what difficulties we might have so that we can challenge them, avoiding alcohol within 2 hours of bedtime, avoiding caffeine within 6 hours of bedtime, starting to relax about an hour before, lying down only when you're sleepy, Be consistent in your bedtime and your wake up time, skip naps or limit them in time. Our sleep environment should be used for sleep and sex only. We shouldn't be engaging in a ton of other activities in our bed that can prevent us from getting good sleep. Wear a sleep mask if we need to block out excessive light. Use earplugs, a fan, or other white noise if there's a ton of noise in your environment. Think about comfort of your bedding. Do we need to change something there? Room temperature, turning off technology. And if you have trouble falling asleep for 15 minutes, get up, do something relaxing, and then go back to bed once you feel sleepy. Also, you don't want to expose yourself to sunlight or other bright lights first thing in the morning, or you do, excuse me, expose yourself to that first thing in the morning because it helps switch your mind into the daytime frame instead of the nighttime. And so here are some other resources that you can use that help us with some of the stuff we talked about. And so, you know, there's a number of TED Talks about flow, about the power of believing you can improve, how to buy happiness, wanting to be happier and staying in the moment, and how mindfulness can help us. And so these are some good things that, you know, if you need to learn a little bit more about any of those, you can engage in. All right, so how do we put strategies into practice, right? We know all these things, we want to change them, we want to work on them. So what do we do? Strategies for creating better habits. First is situation support. So fix bad environments and promote healthy ones. And that can be, you know, our physical environment, who we're around, stuff like that. And so one study found that if you have a candy jar either on your desk or 2 meters away, people consumed 48% more candies when they're on their desk. I don't have to do anything to eat this candy. Whereas if it's, you know, in a drawer or further away, you're going to consume less because there's a barrier there, right? And it may be simple. Oh, I just have to open this drawer. I just have to get up and walk over here. But you're going to eat the candy less, right? So visibility and convenience both matter. Again, we talked about gratitude exercises. We talked about meditation and mindfulness, art. We can engage in lots of different things to create these better habits. Start doing them. Taking that action, putting yourself into the position where you take that action, the more that you do it, the more of a habit it starts to become. Strategies for creating better habits too is goal setting. So we want to be specific. What is the goal we're trying to achieve? Oh, I'm trying to feel better about myself. Well, what does that actually look like? And how do we know when we get there? Visualization is huge. The more that we visualize ourselves doing these things and accomplishing these things, the more we're going to think about them as being realistic and we're going to move towards them. In goal planning, we want to pay attention to implementation intention, which is a self-regulatory strategy in the form of an if-then plan. So if this gets in my way, then I'm going to do this. If this seems too easy, then I'm going to do this, right? And putting these strategies together, we use the acronym WHOOP. Think about your wish. What is the best outcome? What are potential obstacles? And how can we create that if-then plan? So WOOP, wish, outcome, obstacles, and plan. Simple, right? All right, so it seems like we're all ready to go and ready to do these things to increase our happiness. And so we have a challenge on the screen. These are some things that you can do. And so right now, for the next week or two, just choose one of these things that you're going to work on, you're going to put into practice in your life and see what happens. And then you can come back and do another one once you feel pretty steady in that. And so on the final slide, I have some resources from some of the authors that were included, some of the studies that were included, some books. You can look up, you know, YouTube videos of many of these things and many of these people, but these are some things that you might want to look into a little bit further if you're interested. And so the majority of the material did come from the Science of Happiness with Dr. Laurie Santos and the Mayo Guide for Stress-Free Living, which is listed on here by Amit Sood. So hopefully this was helpful for you. Pause the recording where you need to, go back to the places that you need to, and reach out and let me know how things might be going for you, where you might be getting stuck, or all of those successes that have been really beneficial for you. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.